All right, welcome to Colledge Facebook Live, which is a series dedicated to bringing parents and families better information about higher education, a closer look into that world, and really better access into college admissions. I'm Kelsey Tarosian. Tonight, we are absolutely thrilled to invite you to a talk with Purdue University Professor Bill Mullen. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, Kelsey. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So before we get into our conversation, I want to tell everybody a little bit about myself, a little bit about my organization. As I said, I'm Kelsey Tarosian. I am a longtime educator. I can say that I'm truly an educator at heart. I also happen to be the admissions manager at a company called Colledge, and I have been an admissions reader for a highly selective institution, which helps me to keep my finger right on the pulse of what's happening in admissions offices all over the country. And also, the educator's standpoint helps me to really guide students through that process. So Colledge is a private college consulting company. We're a team of experienced admissions professionals. We work closely with students, with families, anywhere on their path to education, to higher education, whether they're in 9th grade right now, whether they're in 7th grade, or whether they're in 11th grade. And it's an amazing, rewarding process that not only helps students to identify best fit colleges and get those applications done, but also it helps them to kind of uncover their passions, and it ignites their deeper potential through the process of discovery and then finding concrete ways to show who they are to the colleges when they apply. So right now is the time of year when many of our students are knee-deep in research and trying to curate their college list, which is an especially tricky task this year with on-campus visits just not available. And so tonight, we wanted to bring you a peek into education at one university, at Purdue University, through the eyes of American Studies and English professor Bill Mullen. So I have known Bill my whole life, and I can tell you that he's an inspiration. He is a published author, an editor. His work focuses around ideas of equality and human rights, starting with his very first edited work, Revolutionary Tales, where he brings forth the voices of African-American women that had up to that point, not been that prevalent, and certainly you could even say stifled. In his work as a professor of American studies, he speaks daily to topics that many Americans now have their eyes open to and their minds on, the political and social relationships, that happen within the country and within the world, how those political and social relationships shape our world, and how our countless subcultures within American culture kind of play into that. And I'm really interested to hear, Bill, if you have any thoughts on how the different subcultures are being affected differently by the pandemic even. So tonight, we want to help you with your college research, and we're excited to bring you into this window. So getting into questions for you, you've always demonstrated your passion for people to me. You have this passion for human dignity, for human rights, and the work that you do, the way that you funnel your tremendous talent for writing and your incredible deep thinking mind towards kind of a place that you believe in, a fight that you believe in, is really inspiring for me. So as a longtime educator, my work has always been fueled by my belief, by my love of people. And I know that each individual person truly has something unique and valuable to offer. And I firmly believe that each one of those people have a right to be seen and valued and heard for that unique person that they are. And that's why I'm here. My work has opened me up so much because I have the opportunity to work with those high school students and help to level that playing field and hopefully help to gain them, better access to the university world. And so on a very different level, there's kind of a similarity and a resonance between, your beliefs and what I know that you really are passionate about, and my own feeling of love for people and wanting to help level that playing field and bring students up. So I remember reading your article, Throwing Stones in Glass Houses, and what really stood out to me was your view of academia and American studies, both as kind of an example of colonization at the university level and as a potential tool for disruption. And I find that this idea speaks to the importance of interdisciplinary study, speaks to the importance of the liberal arts education, critical thinking, awake thinking. So with this in mind, I'd love to ask how these ideas play into your teaching, what you notice from your students, your American Studies students.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I was inspired to teach by a teacher, like a lot of people, and he was a professor at Occidental, where I studied literature. His name was Eric Newhall, and he was really good about bringing social justice and literature together. He introduced me to important African American writers and women writers I had never read before. He also had been a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War and spent some time in jail. And he used to bring all these life stories into the class, into the literature to make it seem personal and real. And that, literature was oftentimes about the struggles of ordinary people to make the world better. And those are the kind of writers I'm interested in. And they're the kind of writers that inspire me as an activist and as an educator. I do think of teaching as a form of activism.
Mhm.
I do think that education is always political. I don't think that anything that happens in a classroom doesn't relate to the world around us. We get up in the morning and we bring ourselves and our lives and our relationships and our work and our paychecks and our bills and into school, and I do it too as a teacher. And so I meet students kind of halfway at the life point in class, and I try to make literature and whatever we're studying a bridge between their life and mine. And I think for me, as an American studies scholar and someone who teaches it like at Purdue, they come together nicely too. Purdue is a really diverse campus.
Hmm.
It is the majority of undergrads are actually from the state of Indiana, but they're not monolithic. A lot of them come from farm families. A lot of them are first in college, first in their family to go to college, which kind of resonates with me too. But on the other side of the spectrum, we have almost 4,000 students from China. We have half of our 8,000 graduate students come from outside the United States, Pakistan, India, Korea. So the town is a global village. The university is a global village. And I love that complexity, and it really shows in the classroom. It's another version of the classroom is the real world. And
Mhm.
Purdue captures that wide spectrum of life experience. And if you teach well and you give students a chance to bring their life experience in to their learning, it really helps them. This is one of the things I first discovered when my first job was at a place called Youngstown State University, which was a public university in a kind of a deindustrialized steel town, and all the kids, parents, grandparents, and aunts and uncles had all worked in the steel mills, and I had never taught students like that before. I didn't grow up in that environment, but
Right.
I realized how much it affected the way they learned, the way they thought about social class, the way they thought about the rich, the way they thought about unions. And so I started to develop curriculum in some ways that spoke to those interests in their lives so that they could kind of see themselves better. So I try to do that a lot as a teacher, and even at Purdue, I've taught like Midwest writers. I talk about Indiana history. I talk about Indiana labor history in my classes because I want students who have come from that place to see themselves in their own education. So for me, the social justice part is actually trying to make people realize, one, that their lives really matter, but two, that they have, in a certain way, an obligation to think about their life in relationship to others, to develop critical empathy, critical sympathy. I think that's part of what liberal arts education is really good at. I think maybe it's its greatest asset is trying to make people see their humanity in relationship to others.
Hmm.
So I'm very much about that.
Wow. That's really inspiring. It's incredible. It sounds like a lot of your curriculum is what one might call emergent and kind of based in who you have in the classroom, really, so that they can see themselves reflected. something I'm more used to talking about at much younger levels in my own teaching experience, but it's a really wonderful way of teaching even at the college level. That's really, really
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, in American studies, we have this thing called, transnationalism. It's the idea that we don't study America, we don't stay inside the borders of the
Right.
country. We think about the United States in global context. And I mean, 2 years ago, I had a graduate seminar with students from Turkmenistan, Central Russia, Turkey, um, Ghana. And, it was perfect place to talk about the United States as a global entity. They had
Mhm.
actually come to American studies as immigrants, as migrants, as non-citizens, and they had all these questions about what it meant for them to be in the United States, what it meant to try to participate in American democracy. And so I chose readings that tended to kind of bring those themes forward. And it just makes a huge difference. And I actually end up learning a lot too. Teaching is not a one-way street. I want to leave the class every day having learned something about my students' lives, what they think. For me, it's very dialectical. It's very much a reciprocation of ideas and information and life experience. So American Studies is a really good field for that. It really tries to stress the local and the universal in conjunction with each other. That every single life is somehow part of a larger social, cultural, political history, and that's what we try to get at.
Wow. Making me wish I was an American Studies major back in the day. So I'm really curious, and it sounds like I have part of an answer to this already, but I'm really wondering, I have always felt that you have this kind of powerful voice and this powerful activist passion, and I'm wondering why of any university that you could have taught at, what drew you to Purdue and what kept you there? And then if you have any reflection also about what's unique about Purdue that brings students there, I would love to hear that as well.
I was Purdue kind of chose me in a sense. Like I was invited to apply for a job directing the American Studies program, and in some ways it was a dream job. I loved the field of American Studies. Um, it had a very robust graduate program. We have a lot of PhD students. I really wanted the chance to work more closely with PhD students, and those were, I think, the two reasons that I said, yeah, I want to go to Purdue. But it also had, like I said, this gigantic, large, diverse undergraduate student body that I thought would be a real challenge to work with. And Purdue's a public university. A lot of people think it's private because it doesn't say Purdue State. But the history of the university was actually founded as what was called a land grant university after the Civil War. A guy named John Purdue, who was an entrepreneur, applied for money, and the federal government was trying to expand and democratize education. And the idea was there were very few public universities in the United States in the 1860s. They were mostly private, they were mostly for rich kids. And they said, we want to open up the higher ed to ordinary people, factory workers and farmers. And people on the West Coast who know Purdue may know its football team, and it's called the Boilermakers.
Mhm.
And the Boilermakers were literally the guys who made the boilers on the trains, right? It was a kind of a tribute to the fact that these were going to be the new students of the university.
Oh, wow.
And that appeals to me too, the idea that this institution was founded to provide open access to democratize higher ed, which in its own way was really, really radical. I think people have to
At a
remember how
time.
elitist the history of higher education has
Yeah.
been. You
Mhm.
know, no, very few people end up going to Harvard and Yale and Dartmouth. Most of them go to places like Purdue, which is a really great school, but it's public and it's open and it's diverse. And so I love teaching in that kind of setting. I feel like that's where you get a cross section of the United States, a cross section of the world. And the fact that it's public means that even economically, there's more diversity. We have some wealthy
Right.
kids, but we have a lot of kids who are on scholarship. We have a lot of kids who are first generation. Um, if if students out there are thinking about a college where they would like those kinds of things, Purdue's a great place for them.
Mhm. Speaking a little bit to student culture, how would you characterize the student culture? Having, I mean, I know you've been there for quite a while now. So what do you notice that's like trends in terms of the type of student that loves being there?
Actually, this makes me really happy because I'm a social justice person, like you said.
Hmm.
I've noticed that I've been at Purdue since 2005. I think there's been a real shift towards social justice issues in the lives and the minds of a lot of students. And I think actually a couple things, very practical things have happened to make that happen. One is, Obama's presidency energized a lot of students, young people, African Americans, students of color. They became more politically engaged in 2012 and 2008. And then I also think that the oddly enough, the economic crisis of 2007 and 8, the kind of the global real estate collapse of the market. I teach a 100 level course sometimes in American Studies called America and the World, and one of the essay questions I ask the students is, tell me what impact in world history has most affected your life.
Hmm.
And it's amazing to me how many of them say it was the financial crash of 2007 and 8, where their parents might have lost their home, they
Right.
got a divorce, they got foreclosed, they got evicted, they had to move. Their lives changed in really profound ways. And so when I talk in class about questions of economic equality, they kind of like they really kind of already get it because they
Yeah.
lived through it. And this is actually what we're going through now. This is like this pandemic is it's a much more severe like sequel to what happened 12 years ago.
Right.
And I am totally positive it's going to be a life-changing generational event for my students for the rest of their lives. I know when I go back to this campus in the fall, they're going to be different people than they were last fall.
Yeah.
And I want to address that. Yeah.
So as a person who has been teaching and doing the distance classroom and continuing with teaching through the shelter at home, what have you noticed? How has that changed your role as a professor? And what have you noticed about the students who are most successful at adapting to
Mm.
this new kind of learning, this new forum?
Well, the first thing is I missed my students so much when I
I
had to
bet.
say it was week 10, and we basically said we all knew we weren't coming back. And it was really strange. Anybody who's a teacher knows you develop this bond with your students and you want to carry it through to the last day of class, and then you send everybody off. So that was difficult. I think that was difficult for me and difficult for them as well. I have to admit that I was so impressed with the way the students uh, handled handled the transition to online learning. At Purdue, students, a lot of them had to move out of the dormitories, move back home, scramble to get 5 or 6 classes of online instruction. I teach 2 classes in each semester. Both my undergraduates and my graduates did really, really fine work. They followed through on their assignments. They made all the Zoom meetings they were supposed to make. They really showed me a lot of dedication. And in the case of my graduate students, there it was a smaller group. They're older, some of them are 25, 30. One of my students in my graduate course was actually a professional nurse. And we would spend the first half hour of my graduate seminar just talking about COVID and how they were coping with it.
Mhm.
And one of my students who was a brilliant African American woman, her partner got COVID right in the middle of class,
Oh, God.
right? And she missed 2 weeks of class. And man, talk about making it very personal. And so one of the things that we started talking about was, well, how does your education mean differently when there's a pandemic? And
Mhm.
we all agreed that, you know, we were going to do the best we could, but we were going to accept that as the best we could. We were not going to um, be so harsh on ourselves because we realized that we were all in crisis.
Right.
And in some ways, it made the whole learning experience, I think, slightly deeper. I think I think if you were going back to liberal arts, we were kind of struggling. COVID made us struggle with what it meant to be human, and it's making us struggle now.
Wow.
And so we would begin class trying to reflect on how that was working for each of us, and then things would sometimes leak into the discussion of whatever the reading was. And I think students really appreciated, and I'm not really patting myself on the back here, but I think students really appreciated the fact that their professor was asking them, "Hey, how's it going,
Yeah.
this week? Are you doing okay?" And that's where the humanity should always be. It should always be at that point, trying to establish that point of contact between people, and we were doing that.
Do you think that this is going to be a necessary change for future of teaching for you, of kind of deepening into our humanity and what it means to be in a post-pandemic or still pandemic-ish world? Do you see that continuing on into the fall?
I do. I mean, I'm already changing my classes to account for COVID, and in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been teaching more on questions of climate change and global ecology. It's not really my specialization, but you can't you can't ignore it. If you're a teacher in our times, in the humanities or anyplace else, you can't ignore it. And so I've been teaching these really wonderful books about the relationship between the development of capitalism and the destruction of the environment, and getting students to think about as I kind of think about it, kind of erasing the line between nature and society, recognizing that human beings are just part of the world ecology. There's one species of many, but the pandemic has actually made that very real in a whole new way. And just the fact that the pandemic actually began in a marketplace and it jumped from animals to humans. And it tells us of how interconnected ecologically and environmentally we are. So I'm looking for some readings for this fall that can kind of bring together what I would call questions of ecology, but how does an epidemic or a pandemic also become an ecological event? Because
Mm,
it very much saturates our environment. We actually relate to the world differently through a mask, right? Or it's through distancing. Um, look at what's happened to the way people eat food. I noticed a lot of people during lockdown have been doing things like gardening.
yeah,
It's really interesting.
and
This
baking.
is actually, or baking, but
Mhm.
these are like fundamental life-making activities
Yes.
that actually the real world, which is the world driven oftentimes by work and pressure to perform, when we have more time to think about what matters, we do turn back to life-making things. And again, this is where things like books and poetry and literature and reading can actually be, in my mind, part of that rehumanizing that we do. So that's what I'm trying to think about in the fall. How can I bring some of these themes into my classes? Because I think students will be dying to talk about what they've been through with
I
COVID,
think
right?
so.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'm curious as to, just quickly, because I want to leave some time for if anybody has any questions. But I'm really curious about, um, oh darn, oh yes, about Purdue in general, and I'm wondering if you find that you are in good company with teachers like yourselves who are thinking about who are thinking actively about their students and relating to their students, and kind of having that emergent kind of curriculum that's responsive to the classroom and the student need. I'm wondering if that is something that is more specific to you as a very unique teacher, or if that's something that's kind of part of the teaching culture at Purdue.
Well, in American studies, a lot of us are like-minded about emphasizing social justice, but
Mhm.
but it's kind of a unique field. It's kind of its mission is a social mission to some extent, in the same way that if you're in gay and lesbian studies or women's studies or African American studies or Chicano studies, these are all fields that actually formed in many ways outside the university by activists asking for curriculum that would reflect themselves. And American Studies has some history of that. So for me, that the faculty that I work with in American Studies, they feel like brothers and sisters to me in that regard. But there's one other part at Purdue that I'm involved with. We have a faculty association, which is basically our union. We call it the American Association of University Professors, and it's a big national association that on some campuses, faculty bargain their contracts through, and on our campus, we simply advocate for faculty rights. And as soon as COVID hit, I was at the time the vice president of our AAUP chapter. We put out a statement immediately that said, we don't want Purdue to fire or furlough or lay off any of its workers because of COVID. And it was impressive to me how many faculty wanted to stand up and say that right away, because they weren't just thinking about themselves. In many ways, faculty are they're the safe elite people on campus. But we were thinking about grounds people, janitors, people who are food service workers. At a lot of campuses already, these are the people that are losing their jobs or being furloughed.
Right.
So COVID has given the faculty, I think, a broader perspective on where they fit in with the rest of the university. And again, this is part of the ecology of the pandemic, right? We
Right.
actually realize that our entire work environment and social environment now is under threat. And so I've been really inspired by the way a lot of faculty have stepped up to try to represent their interests, but also the interest of other people on campus.
Absolutely. That's really wonderful. What I'm kind of hearing and feeling deeply moved by actually is what you were saying about coming back to being human again and kind of rehumanizing ourselves, maybe moving away from being quite so goal, money, work oriented. And that also speaks back to, I think, the theme we touched on earlier, which is the importance of the liberal arts education, because that's what it all comes down to.
There's so many tragic elements of this pandemic, right? Like 38 million people now have filed for unemployment just in the last 6 weeks. The US economy is probably not going to be the same for a long time. A lot of places where people would have gone to work in different areas of the business sector are probably going to struggle. And for me, again, it's a reminder of why the humanities can endure. What we teach is critical thinking, reading and writing. We teach interpretation of text. We teach interdisciplinarily. We try to get students to think of the relationship between things like journalism and business and industry. And I feel like those people are going to be valuable people to help us survive this pandemic, but their skills are going to be very necessary. And in some ways, we've seen a trend against liberal arts education in terms of enrollment in the last 10 years. I think students have been driven by various factors to embrace things like, I want to be an MBA, or
Right.
right, I want to be an engineer, because they've been economically sound places to do your work. But I think people are going to start to see now that those areas are not going to be as safe as they once were, and I would hope that they'll perceive the humanities as a place where they can get a skill set that will help them, go out into a world. A lot of humanities students become teachers, and that's important. We really need more good teachers,
That's true.
but we also need people uh, in all areas of life who have really high level training in things like analysis, historical analysis, cultural analysis, and writing, and that's what we provide.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you so much, Bill, for joining me tonight.
Yeah.
It's been really wonderful and eye-opening to speak with you. And I want to speak a little bit to our audience, kind of in light of what we've been discussing. There's been so much change. Everybody has been affected by this international disaster, and it's really hard on everybody. And as one company, our goal is to help families, it's to help students, it's to help them get to to have access to amazing teachers like Bill and universities, and begin to move forward in their life with their education and be able to process the world around them and help and be a person for others if that is what they want. So one of the things that we've been doing is trying to come up with new options so that we can meet people where they are, meet families where they are. So one of the things I just want to share with everybody is a new plan that we have created, which is very light. It's just for essay work to help you that's right now with everything that's going on and the move away from standardized testing. We see that what's going to be the most important thing is the student's self-representation in that application. So the essay is one of the biggest parts of that. And we want to give students who are directed, know where they want to go, know what they want to major in, but need space, structure, and support to do the writing, that we are offering that right now. So we have this wonderful plan that I'm just sharing my screen quickly. It's the essay only plan. It's going to run through the summer and give you access to all of our essay boot camps. There are 7, and directed essay webinars. And again, right now we're having it on sale, again, trying to meet people where they are and support as many families to go the extra mile and get into the colleges that their kids want to go to. We want to help them now more than ever, and we want to reach more families than ever before. So I just wanted to throw that up there as something that we are offering to families. And I want to thank you again, and thank you to everybody who's watching us for our Colledge Facebook Live. This has been a series that's dedicated to bringing parents and families better information about higher education, better access to college admissions, and a peek behind the curtain of what's going on now. So thank you so much, and thank you again, Bill, and good night to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.